Death Be Not Proud. Death Be Not Proud. John Donne was born in 1572 to a London merchant and his wife. Donne's parents were both Catholic at a time when England was deeply divided over matters of religion. Queen Elizabeth persecuted the Catholics and upheld the Church of England established by her father Henry VIII. The subsequent ruler James I tolerated Catholicism but advised Dunn that he would achieve advancement only in the Church of England. Having renounced his Catholic faith, Dunn was ordained in the Church of England in 1615. Dunn's father died when he was very young, as did several of his brothers and sisters, and his mother remarried twice during his lifetime. Dunn was educated at Ardsall, Oxford, and Lincoln's Inn. He became prodigiously learned, speaking several languages and writing poems in both English and Latin. So Dunn's holy sonnet, Death Be Not Proud, composed in 1617, is addressed to death. In the octave, first 8 lines, part of the sonnet, the poet demolishes the idea that death is mighty and dreadful. In fact, he ascertains that death is desirable for it is an inexhaustible source of delight. So, what the poet tries to show is that only those wanting in discretion and those who are ignorant are struck with fear when faced with the thought of death. On the other hand, the best men of the world have always a longing for it. I read the poem, Death Be Not Proud. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so for those whom thou thinkst thou dost overthrow. Die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but these pictures be, much pleasure than from thee, much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings and desperate men, and dost with poison, war and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. Death thou shalt die. So, Death Be Not Proud is a sonnet having all the characteristics of the metaphysical school. It is combination of reason and emotion with great effect. The point is that the death is not a powerful enemy, though it is supposed to be so. Death belongs to that same class of experiences of rest as sleep. Again, death acts under the direction of chance or fate. Generally, poets think that death is dreadful and powerful enemy because no one is free from its clutches. Nobody can escape from death. But the poet asks death not to be proud. He classes death with sleep and other status of unconsciousness. No doubt, life is suspended under the influence of sleep if one comes back to life. Else, death is defeated in its purpose. Death thinks that he has killed man, but he has not killed him. But he has not killed him. So, for the Christians, believe that the soul is eternal and has life even after death, which comes only once in life. The poet argues that because there is pleasure sleep, there must also be pleasure from death. We cannot experience pleasure of death now. We can infer it from our experience of sleep. Besides, sleep is short, so the quality pleasure is short, but death is long and ends. The quality pleasure also accordingly must be greater. Our best man tells us that after death we get complete rest for our wearied soul, which gets complete freedom from body. So the poet cannot understand why death should be so arrogant because it is also subservient to chance or fate. Only when the agents of death deal men he dies. Agents are kings or poison. So war and sickness, without the help of these agents, death cannot do anything. In the same manner, opium or charm can induce man to sleep in of death. Since death is like sleep, after death on the day of judgment, all the dead bodies have been buried in the tombs, rise up and join the souls. Then when eternal life begins, there is no more. Hence, death itself dies as there is eternal life. So, John Donne, the poet, calls death is a comforter of man. Many people suppose him to be a destroyer, but he is not so. He is proud that he kills man, yet really speaking, man is not killed by death. In the first place, death only belongs to the class of sleep and rest during which only the activities of man are suspended. There is also a revival of the life after death as after sleep. A man dies, then his body is buried in the grave. After the day of judgment, the soul begins its eternal life. Death is great for terror because after death, man gets sufficient rest for his limbs. Once for all, his soul gets freedom from body and its setting. Christians believe that man is born once and gets the encumbrance of the body. Death which comes to him only once frees the soul from the encumbrance of the body for good. Without any reason, death is dreaded as the most powerful enemy of man. Really speaking, death is not powerful at all for once we die. So it's as comfortable as to sleep. We make up to the eternal life. There is neither death nor birth. So death itself is killed. So if we get rid of his fear, we find death a great comfort in life. So metaphysical poetry is marked by the blend of reasoning and emotion, a mingling of homely and sublime, which make the poem full of surprise and variety. There is wit and conceit, learning and passion. Now the image raised by the metaphysical poet is unusual and striking, though not clear and happy. So now we find at least some of these qualities in this poem. The chief character is that he is based on depth of philosophy. The whole poem is based on the general truth. Soul is eternal and everlasting. It will not be destroyed. Thus, the indestructible and eternal nature of the soul humbles death and makes him powerless before the undaunted soul. There is close reasoning in proving death to be powerless. This reasoning is combined with the passionate zeal of a conqueror. Though soul has won the battle and death is lacking the dust before the soul till that death itself lost its killer. The image of death is a powerful tyrant humbled with humiliation so complete that he cannot retrieve his honor at all. is really impressive, though a bit obscure and subtle. The rough and colloquial language used in the poem Poor Death, Death Be Not Proud, Thou Art Slave is keeping with metaphysical poetry. With metaphysical poetry. So, in this way, the poem being poet asked not be proud, through some have called it mighty and dreadful. It is not so. The first two lines emphatically and they distinctly present the poet's viewpoint. They are in fact outspoken and unconventional. The poet has a complete awareness of his opponent's valor. Death has been considered mighty and dreadful by one and all, inclusive of great poets and philosophers. Death is so mighty that it is defied even by the greatest of valiants. This is a truth which has been universally recognized. Though Dunn is conscious of all this, he has denied that it is a tyrant and curtailed his opponent's strength by saying, some have called thee. The next two lines contain the important point of argument. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor it canst thou kill me. So Donne is of the opinion death is not mighty and dreadful because those whom it overthrows do not really die. Death can neither kill others nor kill the poet. The poet now makes a reference to a number of conditions which bear a resemblance to death. From rest and sleep, which build thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee much more must flow. A man who is resting or sleeping without any movement bears a semblance to a dead body. The common usage which connotes the death of a person is that either he is an eternal rest or eternal sleep. So, in these two lines, the poet places upon the word rest and sleep. Rest and sleep as counterfeits of death are in fact a source of gratification because they mitigate man's sufferings and strain. Once the correspondence between rest, sleep, and death is accepted, one has to agree that death is also an unfailing source of rapture and not of awe. So that is the reason why our best men die soon. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones, souls delivery. The widespread belief is that the best men die prematurely because they are God's favorites. Those men voluntarily and joyfully die because they have a knowledge of the fact that death is a source of unending gratification and delight, while their souls are released from the prison of body, their bones find everlasting. This is about the first 8 lines. Next, in the last 6th line, the sestet, the poet makes a much more fierce attack on death. Far from being mighty and dreadful, death in fact is a worthless slave to such agents as fate, chance, kings, and desperate man. It willingly obeys the commands of destiny, calamitous steps, monarchs, and insane murderers. They call death and he acts in obedience to their commands. Death is not a valiant monarch. He is not even a free power. He is a detestable slave who meekly obeys the commands of his leaders. Death associates itself with filthy smelling poison, murderers, wars, and terminal sickness. There is no cause for death to stuck with pride. Poppy or opium and charms produce better effects, and they do so with much softer touches. Death is foolishly pursued with pride, a reference to the Christian myth of the resurrection day is brought up in the penultimate line of the poem. Christians believe that beneath the oceans lie the souls of all the dead men. The whole creation will come to an end after the doomsday, and water will cover the entire earth. It is after this that the day of judgment will come, and as per God's commands, there will be a resurrection of souls. One short sleep past, we wake eternally. When we are asleep, we have absolutely no sense of time. We are unaffected by the passage of time. A few minutes or a few hours make no difference to us. So, what Dunn is trying to suggest is that when those souls buried under the surface of the water are resurrected after millions of years, they will still feel that they have slept for a short time. We wake eternally. Once they are awake from their sleep, they will wake eternally. They will never die again. It is God's sentence which either sends them to hell or to heaven. Whenever they may go, one thing is certain, that is, they go out of death's reach. Therefore, there will be no death. Johnson closes the sonnet with paradoxical statement, death thou shalt die. In fact, there is sustained paradox throughout the poem. Death becomes non existent and meaningless. Death thou shalt die directly addresses death with a final, powerful statement. Dunn develops his triumphant attack on death through the following paradoxical arguments. So, death is not a powerful tyrant, it is sometimes called. Death is a dependent because he can carry on his activity through such agents as fate, chance, or sickness. Sleep is the counterfeit of death. So, death, a restful death, must be more refreshing. Death is a departure because even those that die are not really dead, as there is a belief in a final resurrection from the state of death. Assuming all people wake after sleep, death has no work, it has to die, therefore, death has no terrors for the poet. So, in this poem, the poet treatment of death is unconventional as well as typically metaphysical, and it does so by making use of images and ideas drawn from varied sources like primitive beliefs and religious mythology, reflecting on Dunn's unique manner of using scientific facts and common myths, writes a critic. In such a poem as this is, or The Good Morrow, or again any other poems of John Donne, it is irrelevant to inquire into the logical or scientific variety of the parallelisms and comparisons made. The point is the use of poet makes of them the manner in which common usages, apparent similarities, scientific and psychological facts, religious myths, and theological concepts are harnessed to serve the cause of the predominant emotion or mood, which is invariably unconventional because it is intensely personal. His knowledge of scholarism of the new science may have been imperfect. In fact, It was imperfect, but what was astonishingly perfect was his ability to make use of whatever he knew to suggest or communicate his own personal feeling. Alan Tate remarks that John Donne's interest in the new cosmologists Copernicus and Kepler was not in the interest of a scientist. This was rather an anxiety about the physical limits of consciousness and the bearing of that question on the scholastic conception of body and soul, which Donne presents in the terminology of St. Thomas. Donne knew nothing of a scientific age or of later open conflict between the two worldviews, science and religion, far from having scientific attitude toward the problem of body and soul. He grapples with it not to get any truth out of it apart from his own personality, but to use it as the dramatic framework for his individual emotion. So the diction used by the poet suggests the directness and familiarity of the speaking voice throughout the poem. Donne's tone is argumentative. He was like a lawyer choosing the prettiest arguments for the case of and. In metaphysical poetry, says Mrs. Bennet, emotions are shaped and expressed by logical reasoning. In Death Be Not Proud, for instance, the poet, while addressing the death, makes a challenging statement. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. So the facts declared in the first two lines are developed in the succeeding lines of the sonnet. Succeeding lines of the sonnet. There are two arguments which the poet makes use of in order to support his statement. The first is arithmetically conceived. It depicts rest and sleep as temporary death. The delight which they give is pointed out by him. He progresses further like an arithmetician. If transient death like rest and sleep can yield some amount of pleasure, how much more should eternal death give? Argument number two reckons of the various causes which aid death in realizing his deed. These causes point out death's want of sufficient power to perform the deed single-handed. Death is made even unnecessary by poppy and charms, for they are capable of inducing immediately. These arguments have a connection with the words mighty and dreadful. The poet's argument shows that death is the, as the debate advances, the mighty and dreadful. Death is reduced to the position of a sorrowful slave. The completion of the argument is achieved by the poet when he brings in the Christian notion of everlasting life of soul after the death. And the poem ends with a triumphant note when the poet announces that death will ultimately cease to exist. Argumentation and the use of paradox contribute to the intellectual complexity of the poem. The poet has brought about a total reversion of the popular belief by an intelligent application of logic. The mathematical mode of ascertaining a point shows the intellectual sophistication that Donne could use unconstrainedly in his poetry. This poem is unlike other poems of John Donne, such as the canonization or a valediction forbidding mourning. This is because the conceit of metaphor is not as assertively used in this poem as in the other poems, even if they are and not created in the process of the poem. Even if there are metaphors, they are implicit and not created in the process of the poem. The non-existence of powerful metaphors has helped the poet in maintaining the precise kind of tone indispensable to this sonnet. So some of the annotations line I am going to discuss. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. These lines are taken from the poem Death be not proud, written by William Shakespeare, John Donne. So tells us that generally people think that death is cruel and powerful. No one escapes the clutches of death. Prince and pauper must all go to dust. When this is not a fact, for the poet says, death is like sleep, and in both there is temporary suspension of activity. Even after death, there is life which is eternal. Death cannot kill the soul, for it is eternal. On the other hand, death itself is killed, for there is neither birth nor death in eternal life. Another second important line, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. So in these lines, Jordan poem Death Be Not Proud tells us that is not mighty and dreadful as it is supposed to be, for death cannot kill the external soul of men. Else the poet says that death cannot kill him. Death belongs to the same class as rest and sleep. Sleep is sweet and pleasant as it refreshes man from fatigue and worry. Death after death man gets rest for his wearied body. If from sleep we get pleasure, from death which longer in duration, we must derive greater pleasure. So another important line, and sooner our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. So John Donne in his poem Death Be Not Proud, death calls death a comforter and not a destroyer of man. For all the labors during this life, he gets rest after death. Hence, all good men willingly follow death, for they get ample rest. And another thing is, man gets rid of this body and only by the help of death. Death thus gives man rest and liberation from body. Hence, he is called the comforter and not the destroyer. Another important lines are, thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dosed with poison, war, and sickness. So, death is not a powerful and dreadful as he thought to be, for death like sleep is only a period of rest. Besides, death is not all powerful, for he is directed by fate and chance. He is not free in his function. His agents are tyrants, murderers. They dispose of many men at their feet will. Poison, was and sickness take their own fate. Death can kill persons only with the help of these agents. Hence, he is not independent in his unholy duty. Another important line, one short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death thou shalt die. So in the poem Death Be Not Proud, John Donne says that death is comforter and not destroyer of man. For Christians believe that after the day of judgment, the soul continues its eternal journey. It is only in its journey on the earth that the soul is endowed with a body and the death frees him from that body. But in eternal life, there is neither birth nor death. The soul, unchecked and unhindered, continues its journey through eternity. Death dies here as it has no function. Janton explained the death condition in this poem. Tomorrow we are discussing some other poems and then move on to the novel and novels discussing in the next class. Okay, bye. See you. ರೆಡಿ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಕತೆ ಬಿಡುತ್ತೆ.
ಇವತ್ತೇ ಕೊನೆ ಪೂಜೆ ಪುನಸ್ಕಾರ ಅಂತ ಈ ಮನೆ ವಾಪಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಈ ಬಂದೆ ಮುಂಚೆ ಇರಲ್ಲ ಹೌದೇ ಈ ಪೂಜೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಮಾಡಿ ತಲೆ ಕೆಟ್ಟೆ. ನಮ್ ಶ್ರೀಪತಿ ಅಪ್ಪ ಜೊತೆ ಬೋರ್ ಹೋಗಿತ್ತು.
ನಮ್ಮ ಮಾವ ಅವರು ಹೊಟ್ಟೆ ಪ್ರಭಾವದಿಂದ ಈ ಮನೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನಿಮ್ಮಿಬ್ಬರು ಕಿರುಕುಳದ ಪ್ರಭಾವದಿಂದ ಓಡೋದು. ನಾನೇನು ಹಾಗೆ ಓಡೋದಲ್ಲ.
ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವ್ ಹೆಂಗು ಗುಡಿಯೆಲ್ಲ ಪೂಜೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ವಿ, ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ನಾನ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ದು ಮನೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ
ಹಾ ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಇತ್ತು 200 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೂಡ ಪೆಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಹಾಕ್ತಲ್ಲ.
ಪರಿಹಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ಚಾಲೆಂಜ್